Thank you, and welcome to the Motivational Interviewing, Building a Foundation for Effective Engagement of Cardiac Patients conference call. My name is Michelle, and I will be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. And during the question-and-answer session, if you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. I will now turn the call over to Mr. Ashley Green. Mr. Green, you may begin, sir.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and happy Friday afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining the call today. As Michelle said, my name is Ashley Green, and I'm a Quality Improvement Project Specialist with Metastar, who is partnered with Stratus Health and MPRO to form the Lake Superior Quality Innovation Network. And we're delighted to welcome all of you today and to introduce our speaker. A couple of quick housekeeping items to reiterate. Mia loves questions, so please do not hesitate to put those in the chat box along the way, or if you have other corroborating comments you'd like to make, we certainly welcome those. And as Michelle said, we will have a question and answer period towards the end of the hour, so you can actually call in and ask a few questions. So looking forward to everyone's participation. So I've known Mia for a couple of years now, and we've worked together to bring motivational interviewing workshops to Wisconsin clinicians, community health workers from a wide variety of professions, and there's been such great interest and energy in this, and every time I'm in one of Mia's workshops, I learn something new. So very happy to share Mia's insight and wisdom with you today. So for Mia's bio, she has extensive experience using and helping others to learn motivational interviewing, or MI. She's a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, or MINT, and has facilitated workshops for a diverse group of professionals really across the country, so not just Wisconsin. She's trained as a clinical mental health counselor, and she's used MI in primary care and behavioral health contexts, as well as in telephone coaching for patients and families facing significant medical issues. Having experienced the significant enhancement in her own ability to partner with people and promote complex behavior changes as a result of using MI, she enjoys sharing this approach with others. She's trained professionals in healthcare, social service, early childhood, and criminal justice settings. Mia has a master's in clinical mental health counseling from Valparaiso University, and she's currently the expert training program manager with UW School of Medicine and Public Health Department of Family Medicine and Community Health. And so with that, I'm happy to turn the floor over to Mia.
Thanks, Ashley, and welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking an hour out of your busy Fridays and joining on this call to learn a little bit about just a basic introduction to motivational interviewing, and to think together with me a little bit about how we can best apply what we know from motivational interviewing to best care for patients with cardiac health concerns. So Ashley gave me a great introduction. I'm not going to do much other than that. I do like to give you a little photo just so you know who the voice at the other end, what I generally look like, although my hair's not always that brushed. A few objectives for our hour together today. Hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to identify what we call the spirit of MI, or sort of just a general style or approach, and contrast that with other approaches. We hope that you will have a little bit of knowledge about reflective listening and be able to integrate that skill a little bit into your current practice, your current communication style, if that's something you choose to do. Also, I hope to share with you a couple different MI strategies that we use to have effective relationships with other people, and hopefully at least one of those will be something you want to take home and give a try. And then help you think a little bit more about some next steps for moving forward in your journey with motivational interviewing. I do want to let you know up front that a one-hour webinar on motivational interviewing is certainly not going to be enough to get you ready to deliver motivational interviewing with any level of what we would say, counts as fidelity. So the evidence is pretty strong that motivational interviewing is a very effective approach. we call motivational interviewing an evidence-based practice. It's been found to be that by the research. But we also know that, just hearing a little bit about it on a webinar, even just taking, a one-day workshop often is not enough for individuals to get their skills up to the point where we would really hope to see all the benefits that come. My personal opinion and my experience has been that, learning a little bit, you can implement a little bit and see a little bit of improvement. And the more you learn and the more you implement, the more improvement you'll see. So there definitely is sort of a dose response at play here. We also know that, from the research that people learn best when they have, repeated opportunities to practice the skills that they're learning and when they get some feedback on their performance from someone more experienced than them, and then they work to incorporate that feedback into their practice. So this webinar is really intended to be just a taste of MI, and hopefully a taste that gives you a few take-homes that you want to try and try out with the folks you serve every day. So what is it? I like to give us a clear definition of what this thing is that we're talking about, because although motivational interviewing is getting to be fairly well known, I also think it's a little bit, the name doesn't necessarily tell you what it encompasses. When I hear the word motivational, the first thing that pops into my mind is some sort of motivational speaker. So I think about, is this person going to be someone who is telling me inspiring stories or giving me some sort of pep talk, someone who's going to inspire me from them. And motivational interviewing really is not that. It kind of flips that on its head and works to help you as the professional, or the general term we use for anybody using motivational interviewing could be practitioner. So the practitioner of motivational interviewing is working to, not to supply motivation to the person, but to identify the other person's internal motivation and work to draw that out and really work with and strengthen that. So motivational interviewing is, one definition is that it's a collaborative, person-centered guiding method designed to elicit and strengthen motivation for change. The thing I like most about motivational interviewing is it really provides us with a framework that we can offer some strategic structure to the conversations that we're having with patients so that we are creating opportunities for them to make their own arguments for why any particular change might really be a powerful thing in their life or might be useful or beneficial. So rather than us telling them, we are giving them the chance to tell themselves why they want to make that change. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to go into great detail on this in the research, but there is a very robust evidence base that supports motivational interviewing across a wide range of clinical issues and concerns and a wide range of settings and populations. So when we're doing motivational interviewing, what are our goals? I think about this in terms of answering the question, when might I want to take this tool out of my toolbox, right? So when we want to identify someone's internal motivation, we want to try to reinforce that motivation, and we want to develop a plan to help them achieve some change. So all of you as professionals have a lot of tools in your toolbox, and there may be times when your main objective is to share some education or make a diagnosis, and those times maybe aren't necessarily the times that you are going to pull out all of your motivational interviewing tools. When motivational interviewing really can be most useful is when there really is an issue of motivation, when we're asking the patient to go home and do something, or stop doing something, or do something differently. And in the area of cardiac health, gosh, there are so many things that are really up to the patient, whether it's something as simple as taking their weight every day and monitoring that if they have congestive heart failure, to, something more complex that involves a lot more small tasks from them, such as quitting smoking or trying to maintain a low sodium diet. All of those things are things they have to do. We can't just do them for the patient, which is what makes it so challenging, and what makes motivational interviewing so useful in this area, because there's so much that is so reliant on having an engaged patient who is on board, who understands why certain behaviors are necessary, and who is really tapped into their motivation to do some of these things that aren't always easy to do. So I want to go over with you a few of the key concepts in motivational interviewing. And if we had a full day or a couple days to spend in a workshop, each of these would get a lot more time, but I want to just introduce you to some of these main concepts at a basic level so that you can have a sense of, what the whole package of motivational interviewing encompasses. So some key concepts is, the first thing is that we really want to work to reduce resistance. And one of the ways we do that is through the spirit of motivational interviewing, which we will go into a little more depth with in a minute. But the spirit of motivational interviewing really relies on a competency worldview. So that means that rather than focusing on what's missing or what the person does not have or the areas that they're failing, we really work to train our focus in motivational interviewing on their strengths and their competencies. So what does the person have, and how can I sort of activate those strengths or that knowledge or that know-how? How can I activate that and bring that to bear on our current clinical concern? So, if you have a patient who's really struggling with something, you might probe around into other areas of their life. Are they successful at work? What is it about them that allowed them to do that? Perhaps it's a patient who really struggled through school and yet was able to turn things around and go back and get their GED. What personal fortitude did they use? What strengths, what supports did they use to make that happen in their life? And then helping them think about how could they apply those same things, that same level of effort, to their health behavior under consideration as well. So that's our competency worldview, and we also really work to set up our relationship in a certain way with them, and that's what the spirit of motivational interviewing is about. We try to rely on a spirit of partnership, reinforcing the other person's autonomy, so their own sort of right to make choices and their own ability to be the drivers of their own lives, and empathy. So we want to do all of these things in a spirit of understanding and listening and supportive concern. So we try to, in working from that approach, we work to reduce the amount of times that resistance shows up in the first place in our encounters. And that doesn't mean it eliminates it altogether, but it works to, make it less likely that we're going to trigger someone to feel really defensive, or that we're going to trigger someone to feel like they need to push back and defend their right. You can't tell me what to do. I'll eat what I want. You can't tell me what to do. I'm going to continue smoking because I love it. Those kinds of things. We just don't want to trigger them into that defensive position, so we work really hard to be alongside the other person and not in opposition to them. We also work really hard in motivational interviewing to address their ambivalence. And ambivalence is just our way of talking about that situation that most people find themselves in when they're faced with any life change, which is, feeling two ways about it. Sort of having pros and cons on each side. And what that creates is some tension. And what that creates is that experience of feeling pulled in both directions. A classic example of that is, I really know I should quit smoking, but it's just so hard. And often when you hear this ambivalence, it's presented to you, the patient will say it in that same sort of formulation. This, but that, I wish I could eat healthier, but it's all just too expensive, or I know I need to go to the gym more, but I just don't have time, right? So those are the arguments on both sides. I know I need to do this, I don't have time. So what we work to do is address that by hearing both sides of that, acknowledging both sides of that, and then working to strengthen the side of it that's arguing for the positive change. So tell me a little bit about what you think might be different if you were going to the gym regularly. How would you feel? How would you look? What would be better about that? What might happen with your health? And helping them really sort of build out that side of the argument. And the other piece of that, which goes hand in hand with addressing ambivalence, is developing discrepancy. And discrepancy is just our sort of way of talking about the uncomfortable space, the sort of distance between how things are and how someone wants them to be. So we work to create opportunities for people to feel that discrepancy. Now, where some of the sort of really skillful artistry in motivational interviewing comes in is knowing how much discrepancy to create and how to do it in a way that feels safe enough for the patient to really consider the change and feel that discomfort without getting overwhelmed or pushed to the point where the discomfort is too much and they just shut down or they start feeling defensive and lash out. But working to create some opportunities to ask some questions that might get them thinking ahead in ways that they might not if they're just really spending a lot of their effort trying to keep track of the day-to-day, asking them, what's the worst thing that might happen if you don't get control of your blood sugars? Or what do you think might happen if your blood pressure continues to be this high for the next several months? What do you think the worst thing that might happen is? And just inviting them to do some of that forward thinking can develop a lot of discrepancy. And so in motivational interviewing, we work to, number one, be comfortable ourselves with some of that discomfort, and then also to be skillful enough to create some of those moments of discomfort and allow the person to feel that and be uncomfortable without getting to the point where they're completely overwhelmed. Because change is what comes from that discomfort. If they're able to feel that discomfort, that can be a very powerful motivator. And then the last thing on our list of one of the things that is a very key central concept to motivational interviewing is the idea of change talk. And change talk, really, it's defined as any argument from the other person on the side of change. So anything that they say that could be considered part of their reasoning for why a change makes sense, why a change would be beneficial, why they might want to do a change, why they could achieve a change in a positive way. So talking about their abilities and their strengths to accomplish the change would also be considered change talk. The key thing for change talk is that it has to come out of the other person's mouth. So it's tempting, and I know in our helping professions, especially in healthcare, we know a lot, and we could definitely provide them with lots of ideas about why they should make a change. And speaking strictly for myself, but I know that my experience isn't unique, I certainly would love to just tell people what to do all day long. And if they would only listen to me, their lives would be so much better. And the challenge is it's just so hard to do that from a patient's point of view. It's just so hard to just do these things that you're always being told to do. So in motivational interviewing, we try to hold back on our advice giving and our information sharing and our suggestions, and instead we try to create opportunities for the other person to sort of name their own reasons why, because we know that giving voice to this change talk is a very powerful predictor of change. We know that from the research. It tells us that the more change talk you hear in session and the more committed or more stronger that change talk is, the more likely the patient is going to actually make changes in their real world. So I said we were going to circle back to the spirit of motivational interviewing and just to revisit these concepts for a brief moment, because they really are central to motivational interviewing, and we can, certainly do some of the skills in motivational interviewing all by themselves, and they could be useful, but it's been described sort of as if the spirit is the music notes and the skills are the words. And so if you really want to create a song, you need both. Motivational interviewing skills without the foundation of spirit can easily drift into being sort of manipulative and highly persuasive, and that can certainly backfire on you in terms of creating a positive working relationship with someone. Because then they just feel like you're trying to do something to them versus being with them in a certain way. So we really work on the spirit of motivational interviewing, and there's four main elements of the spirit of motivational interviewing, the first of which is partnership. And partnership really talks about this idea that the professional and the patient are both equal contributors to the conversation, to the solutions, to even identifying what the problem is. And so working to promote that idea that, hey, I do have some expertise in this particular thing, whatever your thing may be, but I do have some expertise in this. I know a lot about how people, can manage their cardiac conditions. And you know a lot about yourself, and you know a lot about how you've been living with this condition, and you know a lot about what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you. So we really have to work together to figure out the best plan for you. So that element of partnership is very important, and what it requires from the professional is to be able to hold back a little bit and not just sort of take over with our agenda and our ideas and our suggestions all the time. And from my experience, that's one of the hardest things is, especially in our very, very time-limited interactions with people, it's easy to feel like I want to just do it because I can do it efficiently. And that would be great if it worked that way. If just telling people what to do led to them making the positive changes, I'd be here on a very short webinar telling you to just tell people what to do. But unfortunately, we know that at least for a wide swath of the population, that doesn't work, and that doesn't lead to them making lasting, sustained, positive health changes. So we need to try a different way, and what motivational interviewing asks of us is to just try to come alongside them, let go of some of our expertise, and just be a partner with them on this journey of behavior change. The second main element of the spirit of motivational interviewing is evocation, and that's just a fancy way of saying drawing it out from the other person. So we want to be hearing more from them than ourselves. We want to give them a chance to talk in the interaction. We want to be sort of setting the stage for them and their ideas, but we want their ideas to take precedent over ours. So we want to ask good questions and do good reflective listening to help draw them out and get them to participate, but really it's going to be mostly focused on them and their ideas and their feelings and thoughts and desires. And then the third element of the spirit of MI is acceptance. And so under this category, under this element, there's a couple different things. The first is accepting the other person's autonomy, right? So reminding them and reminding ourselves that ultimately they're the one who has to make these decisions, and they're the one who has to live with the ramifications of their health choices. So, we very often can get in this mode where we want what's best for the patients, and it feels like we want it more than they want it. And, we want to tell them, you really don't have a choice. You have to take your medication or this is going to happen or this is going to happen. And we certainly do want to make sure that patients have the best information possible to be making the healthiest choices. So should they know what's going to happen if they don't take their medication? Absolutely. But us telling them that they don't have a choice and they have to take their medication or, all is going to be lost, is not the way to get them to listen and really take in that information. So really working hard to convey an attitude that, I understand that you're ultimately the one who has to make all these decisions, reminding them of that and reminding ourselves of that as we go through the interaction. And then the other part of acceptance really talks about sort of our positive approach toward the other person, sort of holding them in what we call unconditional positive regard. It's not always kosher to say this, but sort of an unconditional love for our patients, a valuing of them and what they bring to the encounter. So really just sort of recognizing that there is goodness in them and helping to work with that and draw that out. When people are facing challenges or things that are hard or health concerns, they don't always lead with their best self. A lot of times when people are encountering, significant health issues, they're scared. They feel overwhelmed. They might not understand everything. They feel like you're asking them to do a lot of things that they don't know if they're going to be able to do. And that's a very vulnerable position. And when we feel vulnerable as human beings, sometimes we put out our sort of porcupine quills and get a little prickly. So we want to remember always and act as if we are able to see the best self that resides in the patient and really work to just draw that out and connect with that element of them. And that's kind of encompassed in that acceptance as well. And then the fourth main element of the spirit of motivational interviewing is compassion. And that just means that we are working hard to make sure that we stay focused on what's in the best interest of the other person. What that means is we're not trying to do a sales job on them. We're not trying to convince them to do something just because it would be more efficient for us. We really keep as our true north the best interests of the other person and act out of that sort of compassionate guideline. So one tool that can help us with partnership, which is our first element of the four in the spirit of motivational interviewing, is something like this, which is this fancy example is called the visual behavioral menu, but it often is just called agenda setting. So this is a particular strategy in motivational interviewing that we might use, and what it consists of is at the beginning of an encounter with someone, whether it's going to be, a long relationship where we meet with them over a period of time, maybe as a case manager, if you're meeting with them for a first session and you know you're going to have many you hope you're going to have many follow-up visits with them, this could be something you use to plan out an extended period of time. Or you could use it with some modifications. You could easily use it just for one visit as well. The way this would be used and the example that we're looking at is one that is focused on maintaining a healthy weight for children. So if I was meeting with a child and family member, the way I might introduce this is just to say, you see here on this sheet in front of us that pre-filled in are some of the things that I commonly talk with families about when we meet to talk about healthy weight. And you'll also notice that a few of the circles are blank, and those are where I'm going to want to hear from you, what you want to make sure gets on our agenda. But also, as we look at what's on here, we want to make sure that we talk about physical activity, fruits and vegetables, screen time, sugar-sweetened beverages, and sleep. What would you like to fill in for those empty circles? And then I would fill in, whatever they volunteered. And then I might even ask them to say, okay, looking at all of these, we'll probably have a chance to cover 2 or 3 today. Where would you like to start? And I let them select where we're going to start. So right up front, taking a step down from my expertise, taking a step back from my need to really tightly manage the interaction and giving them some choices right up front, making sure their voice is heard, making sure their needs are represented in the agenda that we've set for our time together, and then making sure that they can have some say-so right up front in terms of how things go. So there's a few things about this particular visual example that I think are a little bit less than ideal. The first is that when I use this in interactions, I like to put it a little more neutrally. So I would, just like I verbally introduced it, rather than writing get enough sleep, I would just write sleep. Because when I look at the way this is written right now, already that's very prescriptive. It's telling me 5 things I have to do. And as a parent, looking at those 5 things, that's pretty overwhelming. So just having them more general, so sleep, fruits and vegetables, physical activities, screen time, beverages, makes it a little more appealing, a little more approachable for our patients. So you might think about how you would use this in your practice. I've seen this used where there's only 3 circles, and if you have a 15 or 20-minute visit, making sure you go in with the 3 circles and having one filled in for you. I want to check in about this. What 2 things do you want to make sure we cover? So that's the other thing that I don't like particularly about this visual example that I've included in the slides, which is the ratio, right? So it's 5 of my agenda items to 3 of theirs. I want it to be at least equal. So 4 and 4 is great. 5 and 3 in the other direction would be even better. So thinking about, how can we sort of really reduce the things that we need to have on our agenda so that we can enter into the conversation with some space and some room for the other person's agenda items as well. So that's just one strategy that we might use in motivational interviewing to really set up our relationships in a way that convey the spirit of partnership and help us sort of hold back on our expertise and let the other person step up and be a little bit in charge of our session and our time as well. It's very flexible. You can also choose to just draw circles and fill them in the moment if you don't want to have pre-filled ones. One nice adaptation that I've seen is to have some, rather than words, having graphics. So, a little TV and iPad picture instead of the screen time one, and, a can of soda and maybe a bottle of water instead of the sugar sweetened beverages one. So just, having those kinds of categories represented visually instead, depending on the population that you work with. So there's a lot of flexibility in this. There's nothing magical about the way it's laid out on this page, but the idea is just to create a visual that you can share with the other person that shows them that you're partnering with them and sharing some of the time on the agenda with them. So I mentioned that change talk is really the other person's own arguments for making a change or not making a change, for making a change, for doing or not doing or doing differently something. And it shows up in a variety of different ways. We hear it with sort of an increasing level of urgency. So we might hear it with low urgency, sounding like what's considered desire. So, I want to quit smoking. I wish I could eat more healthy. I wish I could get physically active. So those reflect change talk. They are considered change talk, but they're not very committed. They're not very confident around, the change talk. So what we want to do is reflect on that and try to get them to move a little further along. We also hear people talking about ability. So I could quit smoking if I wanted to, or maybe when the time is right I would. Those kinds of things. We also hear then as we move along and get a little more urgent and committed, we might hear reasons. If I was able to take my medication as prescribed, then I'd be able to do this. Or need. I know I really have to start figuring out a way to eat that low-sodium diet that's been prescribed, that DASH diet. I got to figure out a way to eat like that. Or, and then as we move along, we start to hear things like commitment. I'm going to, those kinds of things. So just recognizing that there is a continuum that exists within that bigger concept of change talk, and knowing that we want to respond to all of those things. We don't just want to hear the change talk and move along. We want to really amplify that and work with it as much as we can. There are 4 main skills in motivational interviewing. Sometimes these are called the micro skills, and they make up the acronym OARS. So open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. And we are going to spend some time today working on reflective listening. I'm not able to, in our limited time, I'm not able to teach you about all 4. And the reason that I've chosen for us to focus just a little bit on reflective listening is that, first of all, it's the least familiar to people. Most people have an idea about what an open-ended question is and are able to sort of, at least in a workshop, use open-ended versus closed-ended questions and or use more of them. And most people have an idea about what affirmations are, and summaries are really part of reflective listening anyway. So, reflective listening is what is least likely to just naturally show up. If we're not paying attention to it in our conversations, it's not likely to show up. And the other thing is that there is some preliminary research that suggests that the more we're able to use reflective listening in our interactions with the other person, the better their outcomes are. So as the research has progressed on motivational interviewing, we're getting down to sort of the nuts and bolts of it in terms of which pieces are most powerful. And there's some research that's pretty compelling that suggests that it might be this reflective listening thing is a pretty strong key to getting people ready to make some changes and improve their outcomes. So I think it's important to just spend a little bit of time on reflective listening. Of course, after hearing about it a little bit on a webinar, you are not going to be an expert in reflective listening, but I hope to give you a little bit of example and practice, and maybe you'll be able to keep practicing a little bit with your peers and your colleagues and give it a go with some patience at some point. So reflective listening is really just mirroring back what the other person said or meant. We encourage the other person to continue talking when we use reflective listening, and you can really be thoughtful and shape the direction of what you're going to continue to hear about from the other person by being skillful in what you choose to reflect. So an example, this is a patient, and then we'll do a few practice ones, and I'll just let you sort of practice on your own. But this on the slide, you see a potential patient statement, and I'm going to offer you some examples of ways that you could reflect back that statement. So a patient might say to you, "I don't think you understand. I don't have any more sick time at work, so I can't be going to all these appointments all the time. I'm feeling fine now, and I have the pills, so I don't see why my doctor can't just call me in more refills." Right? So you can imagine this is someone who has been dealing with more of a significant issue, and they've used up a lot of sick time, and they're stable now. The pills are working, but they don't want to come in for another visit because they just want you to call in the refills. So my first impulse would be to start arguing back with them about and explaining to them why the doctor has to see them and can't just do the refills, and maybe problem solving with them around sick time and offering appointments at different times. Motivational interviewing says, hey, just pause all that. You may be able to do all of that in a minute, but first we need to just reflect back what we heard from the other person. So we could choose lots of different things out of this example. I might just say, you're feeling really overwhelmed. and it doesn't make sense to you why you need to schedule yet another appointment. That's a reflective listening statement. You could stick a little closer to, that's what we would call a more complex one, right? So I'm interpreting some of their meaning. I might stick a little closer to what they said and do a more simple reflection, which says, you just don't understand why the doctor can't just call in the refills. Right? And I'm just reflecting back what they said. Our simple reflections are a little more like parrots, right? So we can just reflect them back. But our more complex ones, you really have to work to try and understand what is this person trying to communicate. So, you're feeling really overwhelmed. Or you could, if you hear that first line, I don't think you understand, it's hard for you to imagine that I get how hard this is for you. And that's a little bit about your relationship. So you can choose to reflect that back a little bit. You could choose to reflect back, taking the pills has really got you feeling better. If you want to reflect that strength and then, kind of maybe ask a question about that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can reflect. What you want to do is generally we work to structure them by starting. The most common are just starting them with a you. You may have heard, because this is sort of sometimes popular in contemporary, when you hear about reflective listening a lot of times, or active listening, a lot of times you might have learned some introductory sort of clauses, like what I think I hear you saying is, you can't come to another appointment. Or if I hear you right, you're saying the doctor should just call you in more refills, right? And there's nothing wrong with those introductory clauses, but what they do is introduce to the other person that you're about to do something. So if you're doing a lot of reflective listening, which you should be doing if you want to be doing MI involves a lot of reflective listening, you're going to start to sound like a little bit of a reflecting robot and going, what I think I hear you saying is, and what I think I hear you saying is, what I think I hear you saying is. And we often hear that from people who are just not quite yet comfortable with their reflective listening skills because they're trying to just do a lot of reflecting, but not quite yet 100% sure that they could just offer it up. So the strongest, most powerful reflective listening statements really just start with a you. And then they tell the person back. A lot of people get a little concerned, a little nervous that they might miss, right? They might make an assumption or try to interpret some meaning that isn't quite accurate. And that may happen. What we find is that it is rare that the person gets upset that you missed. They usually just correct you and then move on, because as a whole, people want to be understood. So when you're doing reflective listening and you're doing it, sort of with a spirit of partnership and, kind of a compassionate tone, you find that people feel grateful that you're trying to understand them, even if you miss. And they just correct you, and then both of you now have a better understanding of what they meant in the first place. That helps people clarify their ideas. Sometimes the misses in reflections are just as informative, if not more, than the direct hits, where the person goes, yeah, that's it, exactly. And then it's kind of like, okay, now what do I do? Well, then you ask another question. But when you get those misses and they have to really refine what it is that they're saying and explain it clearly, that helps them clarify their thinking. So we're going to try a few examples, a few practice ones. And same thing, so this is just a statement that a client or a patient might say. I'm going to ask everybody on the line to just jot down, grab a scrap of paper or whatever and jot down your own reflective listening example for this. What might you say back to the other person? And then I'll offer some potential solutions or some potential reflections, and you can hang on to yours, and as soon as we get to the Q&A in a minute, we can go through a few of these as well. So it's no fun sticking to that low-sodium diet. I can't eat anything at restaurants, and whenever we get together with our friends or family, I don't want to have to ask them to cook a special meal just for me. So, yeah, sometimes I guess I end up eating more sodium than the doctor said I should. So jot down for yourself what you might say back as a reflective listening statement to that. Okay, so a few examples that jump into my mind are, maybe saying something like, you've really been trying hard to eat in a low sodium way to reduce your sodium, and it's been hard. You haven't always been successful. Or maybe I might say something like, eating out and getting together are the times that really make it hard for you to stick to the low-sodium diet. Something more simple would be something like, sometimes you stay within those sodium guidelines and sometimes you don't. Or I could say, you're really frustrated with this change. This has been hard. Okay, so you can see how you can go in a lot of different directions, and some of that is going to be based on the contextual clues that you're getting from the patient in the moment, right? So if they're showing you a lot of emotion, you're definitely going to want to reflect that. You're going to want to do something more like, you're really frustrated, this has been really hard, just to show that you really get it. Or if they seem like, they're less emotional about it, maybe you want to stick to a little more of the content. And the meaning behind it. So, lots of different ways that we can go in terms of the reflective listening. Let's try one more very quickly. I can take these water pills fine on most days, but on a day when I'm going to be out and about and I can't trust that I'm going to be able to find a bathroom in time, I wouldn't mind if those pills didn't have to make me go so much all day. So a reflective listening statement for this, it sounds something like, it's hardest when you have to be out and about. These pills really make you have to use the bathroom a lot. It's frustrating for you. It's embarrassing when you're out and about and you have to use the bathroom so much, right? So lots of different ways, lots of different directions that you could go. And you may have, as you were hearing those, been a little bit triggered to correct some of the thinking or offer some solutions. Motivational interviewing does not say that we can't do that. It just has a specific way that we want to do that in. So one of the things is, and we'll get to that in one more slide. So the first thing is that if you aren't hearing any change talk from people, you want to ask them for it, right? So what are some of your concerns about your high blood pressure, your congestive heart failure? What might be the worst thing that could happen if things continue as they are? How might making a change be beneficial for you? How might that help your health? So these are a few strategies that you can use, just these specific questions with some adaptations to make them specific to your clinical concern, or, a few different questions. Are ways that you can really draw out some of that change talk. And this last slide shows how we can share information in an MI way. So we really, before we want to do some education or giving them solutions, we want to explore what they already know. So tell me a little bit about ways you already have figured out to make it more convenient when you have to take your water pill and yet you have to be out and about in the world for the day, and you're going to need to find bathrooms. Tell me what you've already come up with in terms of ways to work around that. Sounds like not taking the pills is one way. What else? So you'll hear their thoughts and their ideas, and then you might say, could I offer a few other things? And then you could offer, some more information, a menu of options of other things to do. And then you want to do that last step is very important, which is explore their reactions to those ideas. So what if those ideas made sense to you? Do any of those sound doable? What do you think you might want to give a try? So really, we call this explore, offer, explore, and it's another MI strategy that you might want to try, especially if your role involves a lot of educating or planning, because this can help really do it in a way that engages the other person, keeps them tied in. So as a summary, MI, we know, involves working in a way that conveys partnership, evocation, acceptance, and compassion. We heard about some strategies such as explore, offer, explore, and agenda sharing, and some questions to ask for change talk that can help us establish partnership and invite patients to really be active members of their healthcare team. Change talk is really a crucial thing in motivational interviewing, and it's when patients make their own arguments for change. And we work so much on this in motivational interviewing because we know it plays an important role in motivation. And there are really a lot of resources available to learn more about motivational interviewing. So Guilford Press publishes a large, it's called Applications of Motivational Interviewing series. So there's a lot of specific MI books. You can get them anywhere, but the list of all of them is available on the Guilford Press website, but then you can get them wherever books are sold. The Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers is another good resource. And there are some online resources as well. So these are online courses, short courses you could take, and video demonstrations that you might be interested in engaging with. So at this point, I'm sorry we only have a few minutes left, but if anyone would like to ask any questions, you are certainly welcome. Our operator will remind you how to do that over the phone, or please put them in the chat box if you'd rather do it that way.
Thank you, ma'am. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you wish to be removed from the queue, please press the pound sign or the hash key. There will be a delay before the first question is announced. If you're using a speakerphone, you may need to pick up on your handset first before pressing the numbers. Once again, if you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. We're standing by for questions, ma'am.
Okay, so I see a question in the chat box about when these slides will be made available. Ashley, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, we will make those available. It usually takes a couple of days to have those posted. We'll let everyone know.
Okay, so keep an eye out for those. Any other questions or comments?
I have no audio questions, ma'am.
Okay, you also do have... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, that's okay. I do have one question that has entered the queue from Jennifer. Your line is open, ma'am.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to make a comment that this is a very good presentation, and I really appreciated the opportunities to, actually apply the motivational interviewing, because it is an awkward feeling when you're not used to it. So that would be something really to have more of in the future. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's hard to do practice over a webinar, but I tried my best to figure out a way to get a little bit of it in anyway.
It was very good. Very
good. And some of those online resources might be beneficial to you as well. All of the online ones that I have linked in the slides or referenced in the slides are free of charge. So those might be things you might be interested in checking out as well for some more opportunities to do some of that.
Great.
And my email is listed on the last slide. If you do have questions or would like me to point you in any particular direction toward a specific resource, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. Sometimes it takes me a few days to get back to you, but I love to do that kind of stuff, so just please let me know. And Ashley, I don't know if you have any other closing remarks.
Yeah, just to thank you, Mia, as always. I guess we'll give you a large round of virtual applause here. You can't hear everyone, so thank you as always, and to folks on the phone, thanks for joining us today. And if you have a greater interest in this, please don't hesitate to reach out to Mia, certainly, but also your contacts at either Stratus, Impro, or here in Madison, Metastar. We are always happy to field those questions. That we want to see how large the interest in this field is, because we can offer some resources in that area. So thank you again to everyone for a good webinar. Mia, thanks to you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This will conclude today's conference. Thank you for participating, and you may now disconnect.